Without much fanfare, let's begin today's astro weather. Thanks for being here. Running a little behind the time today because of, well, I just am. There's no excuse for it. Just like yesterday, there was no excuse for me to have the wrong chart at the beginning of the show and then course correct somewhere in the middle of the show and actually produce the correct chart. I apologize for that. See, it's Aries season. Well, it was, and I'm apologizing for my error. And I want to thank everybody who was so, how do I say this? Activated. That's a good word. Activated to alert me that it was the wrong chart. And I appreciate that. Thank you, everybody. It took me about a day to get to the appreciation part, but I appreciate it. Thank you very much. The eclipse was a motherfucker. Can I just say that one more time? The eclipse was a motherfucker. I was simultaneously exhausted and wanted to kill somebody yesterday. Right? It was in that edgy, super edgy space where I was just wrung out and not in a mood to, as they say, suffer fools gladly. I had to really work on my attitude and my state of mind as the day went on, and I was exhausted. It was just it was an intense, draining. A lot of times with eclipses, I tend to get tired. That's the notice that I have, is I tend to get tired, and that was not the exception with this eclipse. And part of it had to do with the fact that the night before, I couldn't sleep for shit. I mean, I think I finally got to bed at 2 a.m. And then, of course, I have to get up and prepare for the show. And that's at 7 at the really the latest. And so I was running on about 5 hours of non-productive sleep. And so that's what you got. And I thought yesterday's show was pretty good, especially the Jesse James stuff, but it's been consigned to the dustbin of history because the Virgo part of me kicked in. The 29th degree kicked in and said, yeah, can't have it. Can't have it. So anyway, we're here today, and I hope everybody is still weathering the storm, and we're still in the eclipse path, eclipse cycle. It is 4:20. By the way, shout out to Laura Wilson. Happy solar return to you today, Laura, if you're watching the show. I hope this is a absolutely blessed and wonderful year, and that your growth continues to be solid and up and to the right. Solid and up and to the right. So I was looking at properties yesterday, and because I have to figure out what to do with other parts of my life. And it's really mind-blowing with the real estate market. You know, we're entering into Taurus now. So this is the big discussion about real estate. And, you know, is it plausible? Can you buy? What's on the table? And the market is really stagnant. And we have a Mercury retrograde coming up very shortly, by the way. I believe we started on Friday, if I'm not mistaken. So the Mercury retrograde, it's at 15. It starts at 15 Taurus. That'll definitely be an interesting movement when it comes to money, and it comes to the distribution of money. And right now, for some people, money is tight. Getting a loan, high interest rates, they've made it almost punitive. For other people like Budweiser, their stock is up. Go figure. All right, enough with the political, socioeconomic dive. We'll talk more about Mercury retrograde probably tomorrow. Let's get into chart of the day. So we're in the aftermath of the dark eclipse. And as I mentioned on yesterday's show, just to be sure now, just to be sure, we have 4/20/23. For 2023, there it is, 8 a.m. The chart is correct. And we are in the aftermath of this this very intense eclipse. And it is, as I mentioned yesterday, the start of a 3 eclipse cycle, which will culminate in April of 2024. And, again, as I brought up on yesterday's show, it is not by coincidence that the conversation and the dialogue was focused on what's happening in the South. And when I say the South, I'm talking about Central America, Panama, Colombia, the Darien Gap, immigration, the news that there are Chinese nationals in great numbers that are moving up towards the border. This is all part of the eclipse energy. Then there's talk of the cartels charging $35,000 per person coming across the border. And so now we have the dialogue of the cartels coming into play as it relates to these Chinese nationals. And remember that all of this started to happen around this eclipse, and these 2 eclipses, the big ones that are coming in October and in April, all are moving through the same part of Texas. In October, it starts in Oregon, and then it arcs its way down all the way through where I am and where we'll be on October 13th, 14th, and 15th. Such a powerful day, October 13th. It's a Friday, and October 13th, the Friday, is when Jacques de Molay and the Knights Templars were raided and killed by Pope Innocent. Very interesting day. I mean, Friday the 13th, I got no problem with Friday the 13th. But that Friday the 13th in the month of October is the historical mirror of that day. And the following day, there's an eclipse. So there's a lot of heavy, loaded symbolism. All right, let's zoom in on this a little bit. And let's take a look at what we're dealing with here today. Well, we're dealing with aftermath energy. But it's still, I mean, the energy is still here. I mean, especially if you had an event or something that occurred in your life on the eclipse. And there's Mercury just about ready to go retrograde. Look at that. Just about ready to go retrograde. We'll talk about that tomorrow. And we'll get 3.5 weeks of Mercury going backwards through the money sign Taurus. The degree of this Mercury, 15, 16, those are very interesting degrees in the Sabian symbols. The 16th degree has the paraphrase. I'm paraphrasing for the 16th. Maybe even have it up here. Let me just bring it up. Oh, look at that. I happen to have it up. So we're going to look at Taurus 16 and 15. This is just a precursor for Mercury retrograde. Let me just stop the share here and I'll show you what I'm talking about. These degrees are again pretty critical. They're happening in the Virgo decan. And the Virgo decan is mercurial and a bit unstable. 16, an old teacher fails to interest his pupils in traditional knowledge. This is quite interesting. If you look at what happened in Chicago over the weekend, which seems to have been, if you really want to drill down into that Chicago event where essentially the youth took over the city. This is very, very symbolic of the energy where the voices of reason, right? The voices of reason, the old teacher who has traditional knowledge, which are things to share, are of no interest. They're of no interest to his young students. This is a part of this Mercury retrograde, right? People are rejecting. They're rejecting things that are logical and rational and have within them kernels of wisdom. This is the energy of revolt right here. Now, the other, Peachy is chasing her tail. She's revolting against her tail. Now, the other symbol here, which I think is also probably the one that is the most prevalent, although the other I think is quite meaningful and relevant, is Taurus 15, head covered with a rakish silk hat, muffled against the cold. A man braves the storm. Okay, that is a really interesting symbol. That is where Mercury is moving backwards. And that symbol is one that it's not warm and fuzzy. You know, it's like somebody who once had a degree of style, still has it, but it's tattered. And he's wearing his rakish hat and scarf, and he's facing the cold wind that is descending upon him and his life. It's a very interesting symbol, and in a lot of ways, it really fits with the money game. It fits with the money game. It fits with our relationship with materiality, and we're bracing ourselves for what's coming, right? And there's a lot more that goes along with that symbol. And I'm going to be doing a webinar in the end of May. I think it's the 21st. And it's about the future of money. So I'm going to get into a lot more of this during that webinar because it is really a very intense game right now around money and security and assets and resources. And with Mercury retrograde in Taurus at those degrees, you're seeing two very powerful symbols: the rejection, the outright rejection of traditional values or traditional ideas, right? That's part of it. And the other is bracing oneself, using what one has at their disposal. And those things being the things that made them who they were or how they identified with themselves. Even if they are old, right? It is a symbol of the finery that is being tested against the cold wind that's about to descend upon the individual. And it might be a bit tattered, but if you're going to face the cold and dark future, you may as well face it in style, right? That's where Mercury retrograde is headed. And that is, again, part of this eclipse cycle. And people are really looking around. And I think the money game and the money distribution game is a big part of the dialogue with this Mercury retrograde. It's people, I think, are going to get a real wake-up call. So that's where we are with Mercury retrograde and the symbolic aspects of it. Let's go back into the screen share a little bit and see where else we are. You know, we're looking for ground. We're desperately looking for ground here. We have the sun, we have the new moon in Taurus, the true node, right? This is all kind of part of that eclipse energy with the node. I watched the eclipse a little bit last night on YouTube coming out of Australia. You know, they do have these live eclipse streams. And you can just see it, right? You can see the sun start to get darker and darker and darker. Anyway, we're looking for land, and we've made a bit of a shift here because all of the planets, Venus, Mercury, Chiron, the sun, Jupiter, they've all been in Aries, and this Aries season has been very intense. And it's an energy that's been really, I think, connected to fight or flight, and the strident energy in the air is quite evident. Everything from the Dylan Mulvaney protest and boycott to people getting just more agitated and more edgy and willing to put up with less. Right, that's all been a part of Aries season. We're trying to find ground now with the true node and the moon and Mercury and Uranus and Juno. We're looking for something to, put our feet on. Today's a good day to take your shoes off and really just put them in the ground. If you're into this earthing thing. Today is a good day. You don't want to miss the earthing opportunity today. Just get outside, take your shoes off, connect, put your souls on the planet, right? Put your souls on the planet. Try to absorb some of those good geomagnetic and electric currents coming up through your body. Your body will like it. Also, with the new moon in this phase, I would say don't be afraid to treat yourself to something. The Virgo in me says don't overindulge, but don't be afraid to treat yourself to something. If you can pull yourself out of the intensity of the post-eclipse moment, either have a nice meal that you prepare for yourself or go somewhere where you can afford to eat and enjoy a nice meal, one that will ground you. I would say go comfort food. I would say go healthy comfort food. But this is a day where you invest in grounding, right? This is a very, very solid opportunity for the individual to come off this eclipse. If you could do something like a magnesium bath, with the bath salts, this is one of those days, right? You want to be charged with the elements of the earth. This is a good day for it. And, we are in this new moon phase too. That's the other part, right? The eclipse gets all of this intensity and energy. And of course, Jupiter made it so much bigger. But let's not lose sight of the fact that in the new moon phase, we are, especially here in Taurus, we are dealing with intentionality. The intentionality and the potentiality for abundance is challenged with Pluto in Aquarius. It's right here, right? So this moon Pluto square. And one of the things that is really, I think, a bit of a uphill climb for people is the fact that people still have dreams, they still have aspirations, they still have goals, they still have things that they want to do. And the dominant paradigm, based on how we've lived and the systems that we've been inhabiting for the past, let's say, 100 years, that's all radically changed, right? Radically changed. So let's say you wanted to get a loan for something, like maybe it's a loan for your business or a loan for a house. This is going to be much more difficult during this phase, just over the course of the next couple of days, because the moon, of course, shifts. But when you're into intentionality, and especially this new moon in Taurus, which is one of the best new moons, this is theoretically the planting moon. Although sometimes you want to get depending on where you are, you want to get your plants in the ground a little bit before this. But this is the planting moon. This is the moon where, again, you're digging into the topsoil, right? And you're planting your seeds both directly and metaphorically. And there's a challenge here with Pluto. There's a challenge. And even this sense that if you can follow through on your intentionality, will it pass muster? Will the things that you plant now have time? Will they grow into the season? This is a big energy here, because these are fixed energies. And part of this is also moving through your fear. And man, this eclipse, how I experienced this eclipse, and I think how other people might have experienced it, is where are you on your quote unquote achievement scale? Right? That was a big thing for me with the eclipse. Like I'm trying to make a bit of a pivot with my life. Coming up on the Uranus square, and everybody has the Uranus square at a particular time in your life. It's in your 60s. There's a time to make this pivot, and not that I'm giving up astrology or giving this part of my life up, but I'm looking to make a pivot and incorporate something else into my life. And part of what I'm looking at is an idea for property and tiny homes and some RVs. And I found what I think is the perfect location. The only challenge with that perfect location is it's probably going to cost me close to about $2.5 million to get into it, right? And that's when the eclipse hits. And I look at myself and I look at my life and I'm like, what the fuck have you been doing? What have you been doing? You've been doing this thing since 2010. 13 years, what is it? 13 years now. Go back to 29. We'll throw in 29 when I really started to do a lot of writing. 14 years. And I thought to myself, you would think that after doing this for 14 years, I would have acquired some assets. There are some astrologers that make a shit ton of money. A shit ton of money. There's some very wealthy astrologers out there. I am not one of them. And yesterday was one of those days where, the critical nature, and then even like fucking up and having the wrong, moon for half the show because I did the planning for it later in the night because I was so intensely busy yesterday that I had to put that off to later in the day so I could do it the night before. And that's a terrible thing to do, right? It's a terrible thing to do, to kind of cram the night before and get it done, although I've done it in the past and it hasn't really fucked up on me like that, but it did. And so there was that. And then kind of looking at this idea of making a pivot and then checking my bank account. And I'm not the only one. There was that energy in the air. And, Aries is the self, and the Jupiter effect magnifies everything. And so with the eclipse, and I talked about this on Sunday night, like we're dealing with these things that come up and arise out of the self. And that was a hard day. I was pretty hard on myself yesterday. And I try to, I feel like I have a contract with you, the people that watch the show, and the public, to show up and to be as clear and clean in this space as possible, right? That is my contract to you. Like I have to handle this space. And yesterday was one of those days where it was like, I thought I did pretty well during the actual show itself. But then afterwards, that was when things really started to like hit me. So we're still coming off this energy now, right? And we have the possibility of reaching ground. This is all very volcanic. You deal with this kind of volcanic energy of Aries, which is eruptive and erupting. It's kind of interesting because it gets into our star of the day a little bit. And then, we have the new land that forms over here with Taurus. And so we're really trying to cool our heels and touch new land. But we're there and we want more, right? We're not just content to experience some form of respite or repose, right? Repose. We're not just content for that. We're not content for just some period of let me find some shelter and some shade. There's more coming off of this eclipse. And you can clearly see it here with this square with Pluto. Pluto, of course, is resources and assets, right? So this is a very, you would think that we would have some reprieve here, but we don't really have the reprieve. Now we're challenged. What does it look like? What is shelter? What is foundation? What do our resources look like? And if you had a day yesterday where you came up against the shadow of the quote unquote self and who you are or were and who or what you've accumulated during that time, and you came out of that personal transaction feeling like you're on the debit side versus the credit side, it doesn't get easier today. It does not get easier. Now, the one thing that I will say is that you can take reasonable action with this Mercury sextile to Mars and this Uranus sextile to Mars. And I think this is about gently disrupting your everyday activity, right? This is a gentle disruption. You don't want to have a jarring disruption. You want a gentle disruption. You need to have a shift, a state shift, as Tony Robbins would say. So this is a day where You have to figure out how to get off this square, how to get off this block, how to deal with feelings of insecurity, feelings of where is the money, where's the assets, where's the future. And this is proactive. So I would say do something proactive. Do something proactive today, but you have to change your routine up a little bit. It can't be the same. We're talking about novelty here. Money-wise, you may want to look at investments. I've been reading a lot about silver. Zimbabwe, by the way, has told the IMF to go fuck themselves. And they went back to gold. And the IMF told Zimbabwe, formerly Rhodesia, Zimbabwe was dealing with the IMF, and the IMF said, hey, look, you got to come into our system and you've got to run your economy the way that we want you to run it. And the people of Zimbabwe said, we're going to gold. Remember, that's an area where they have a lot of diamonds and they have a lot of gold. So they said, we're going to gold. We're going to go on to a gold standard. And the IMF said, well, you're going to be dealing with inflation like you won't believe. The people of Zimbabwe proved them wrong, and their inflation is going down. That's in the air, right? That is the Mercury, sextile Mars, Mercury, Uranus conjunction. What did they do? They decided that they were going to play ball with the IMF. That is something different. Keep your eye on Africa. Africa is a very interesting continent, and they may be in more of a revolutionary state than other parts of the globe. Keep your eye on them. Very interesting stuff. We still have the Venus-Saturn square. Our relationships are tested. The ones that matter, have merit, have meaning. The ones that you invest in, they will endure through the Venus-Saturn square. But we are definitely getting tested during this time. The good news with Venus, it's moving on just a bit, right? So by next week, it'll be out of the orb, and we'll be having a different discussion about Venus. Long-term investment here. All right, let's get into the star of the day, because I got to do another show. And of course, I'm behind the curve on that, but that's okay. All right, today was a hard pick for the star of the day. Really hard pick. Now, the easy choice would have been Hitler. That would have been the easy choice. But when you run into Hitler, you run into some highly controversial territory with Hitler. And quite honestly, Hitler's chart is not that impressive. Like it is hard to find Hitler in the chart, believe it or not. It's very fascinating, and it could be, it could be something that would be a good topic for another show, because you would have to look at the chart, and you would have to look at how and I would say he has a pretty average chart in some ways. How does somebody who has an average chart rise to such a level of power and dark infamy? I don't have time to do that today. So today I chose somebody who I thought was quite interesting. And today's star of the day is Crispin Glover. Now, a lot of you might know Crispin Glover from Back to the Future. I think he was also in American Psycho. Crispin Glover is a very interesting character. He followed me on Facebook for a while, which I appreciated. He followed me on Facebook. He's a very interesting character. And the thing about Crispin Glover is that when you have these kind of public moments with him, like when he was on the Letterman show, you don't know who the fuck or what the fuck he is. You don't know it. Is it an act? Is this really the guy? Like, it is really hard to dial in on him as a character, because he's got Sun, Jupiter in Taurus, Mars and Aries, all in the 12th house. Mercury, this guy is about as private as it gets. And yet he is an actor, and he is got a public face, and is, has to do interviews. He's really eccentric, and you can see the eccentricity, right? Pluto Uranus, he's got that Pluto Uranus conjunction in the fifth house. And also, which is really weird here, is that this is the house of hobbies. Crispin Glover's got some weird hobbies, which he has displayed on David Letterman's show. Very weird hobbies. And I watched a clip with him on Letterman, and he actually has these little art pieces, and one of them has to do with a volcano. I shit you not, right? He's got this little volcano art piece, and he has this volcanic setup here, right? With Mars erupting, Mars and Aries erupting, like really out of that 12th house. It's this kind of magmic eruption out of the ocean. And then, of course, there's land on the other side of this. So I thought that's really interesting that he's got this strange little volcanic art piece. He's got Venus in Gemini. You don't know who he is. You really don't know who he is. What I also thought was interesting is with Capricorn on his midheaven, that one of the roles that he's known for is playing Marty McFly's father. He's right around the same age as Michael J. Fox, and yet he has to play his father. And that's very Capricornian on the midheaven, right? He plays the older character. He's a really trippy guy. What I think is interesting about him is that he's probably more traditional than you would think. Like, he's got strange hobbies. He's really eccentric. You don't really know who he is, right? And when he comes out of his cage on Letterman, right, you get a big dose of that Sun-Jupiter conjunction. But there's a part of him that is very traditional, with the true node in Cancer and the moon in Leo in the 4th house. So I think Crispin Glover is probably one of these guys that's pretty misunderstood and has a touch of genius about him. He's got the Mercury Uranus trine, Mercury Pluto trine. He's extremely bright, like very bright, and also not always connected to how he's feeling. Right, that's that Moon Neptune square. Sorry, Mercury Moon square, and then the Moon opposition to Neptune. And Neptune is part of this yacht in his chart, which he has to resolve via relationships in his life. And I would think that he might have issues around trusting people in general, especially with this kind of hermetic self. So I wanted to, I'm not going to play the exact clip because I don't want this show to get tossed off of YouTube. But there's a famous episode of him and David Letterman. He was actually on Letterman twice. And I was surprised that Letterman let him back on, because Letterman kicked him off. And I really thought that this was a bit of performance art, right? Like, this is Crispin Glover challenging David Letterman to an arm wrestling contest and then throwing kicks at David Letterman's face. I still am on the fence a little bit about this being slightly staged, but when you go back and see it, Letterman is visibly upset, right? And if you go look at Crispin Glover's chart, and I'll come back here, and this is really the fascinating part. If it isn't already fascinating, I think it's pretty fascinating. But if you look at his chart, go over here, you'll see Mars in Aries. Guess whose Aries sun is right here? David Letterman. There you go. The proof is in the pudding with astrology. There's our star of the day, the very eccentric, very talented, probably very misunderstood Crispin Glover. He's got a more interesting chart than Hitler. That's really why I chose him. All right, please join me over on 15 Minutes of Flame. I'll be there shortly as we get on the hamster wheel of content creation. 9:11 a.m. Central Standard Time, 10:41 a.m. We're here for about an hour and a half as it works out. Tuesday through Thursday, so come on over. A lot of the same people who are part of the greatest chat on the internet are there. and we'll get into some very interesting conversation about the sneakiest feminist film ever made. It's Thursday, and I do some cinematic breakdowns on Thursday, so please join me. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being patient with yesterday's show, and thank you for everybody who were very engaged in trying to get my attention about the chart. I appreciate your looking after me, and it shows that you're on the ball with astrology. As we move off the eclipse and we do our best to find solid ground, take your shoes off, put your feet on the earth for just a few moments, and remember where you are. Take care. Hope to see you there. Bye for now.